Now, let's talk about Carl Jung theory of personality, which he developed his own school of thought, which eventually came to be known as analytical psychology. All right, so here are the key concepts that we will discuss in this theory. All right, so occult phenomena. So when we say occult, it means supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs, no, that can and do influence the lives of everyone. So Carl Jung strongly believed of some mystical, religious, spiritual phenomena, no, na sinasabi niya na these things na although hindi natin concretely na nakikita, 'di ba? Pero meron daw siyang influence or meron siyang parang cause, no, doon sa buhay natin. Okay? So, and even the family of Carl Jung is some kind of weird family, I think. No, they also believe that kahit na yung mga dead members of the family na kasama pa rin nila, no, na parang hindi ito talaga nawawala. Okay? And ayun, so merong scenario doon na during dinner or or during yung habang kumakain sila na meron pa ring plato yung member of the family na patay na. So, kasi naniniwala sila na kasama pa rin nila yung family member na yun. So, may mga ganong scenario dun sa family ni Carl Jung. Actually, si Carl Jung ay matagal siyang nabuhay na mag-isa lang, no? Kumbaga, may naunang dalawang brothers bago siya ipanganak, pero namatay yun. And then, matagal din siya bago nasundan. So, matagal siyang nabuhay bilang only child. And, yan. Each of us is motivated not only by repressed experiences, but also by certain emotionally toned experiences inherited from our ancestors. Inherited images make up what Jung called the collective unconscious. So, itong collective unconscious is something unique dito sa theory ni Carl Jung. No? Kung mapapansin natin, dun sa theory ni Sigmund Freud, binanggit na niya yung collective na yan. Although, ibang pangalan, no? Hindi niya masyadong in-emphasize yung about sa collective unconscious. Tinawag niya yon na phylogenetic endowment, no? Kasi nga, kumbaga parang, yun yung paliwanag niya doon sa mga hindi natin maipaliwanag na unconscious material, na may mga ginagawa tayo, may mga behavior tayo na we cannot explain anymore. So, most probably, according to Freud, that maybe that belongs to our phylogenetic endowment. And pinangalanan niya ni Carl Jung. Kasi si Carl Jung, sabi niya, um, hindi daw, kumbaga yung unconscious mind ay hindi repressed, no? Kasi kay Freud, it's something repressed, no? It's something repressed material na kung saan mga desires, mga beliefs, mga images na ayaw natin na ma-remember or ayaw natin na to be aware of. But for Carl Jung, this unconsciousness, he believes that um, he viewed the unconscious as the source of consciousness. Kumbaga, kung walang unconscious, walang conscious. Parang ganon. No? Kumbaga, it opens possibilities in life, no? Through dreams. Yun yung, kumbaga kay Carl Jung, ang meaning ng dreams is something futuristic, no? Yung mga gusto mong mangyari, pwedeng mga goals, aspirations in life, ganyan. But for Freud, it has something to do with the past. Diba? Parang, may ginawa ka before na something traumatic or something dark. That's why lumalabas siya sa dream mo kasi hindi siya pwede sa present life. Parang ganon. So, yan. And we inherited this collective collective unconscious, no? Kaya siya tinawag na collective, meaning we shared, no? We shared common uh, experiences, yan, na that would explain why are we acting like this, parang ganon, no? It includes those elements that we have never experienced individually but which have come down to us from our ancestors. So probably it might explain the phenomena of why are we afraid of the dark, why are we afraid of snakes and heights and other phenomenon, di ba? Kumbaga parang hindi naman natin individually na naranasan yun, hindi naman tayo naka-experience na makagat ng leon o makagat ng ahas, pero somehow we shared the common reaction, no? The common behavior. Yan. So, collective kasi shared siya. Maraming tao ang nakaranas nun. And it was ano to, minana pa natin. It was, kumaga parang nakuha pa natin, no, sa ating mga ancestors. Some elements of the collective unconscious become highly developed and are called archetypes. Ayan. So, yung mga ibang elemento daw doon sa collective unconscious na yun ay nagiging, kumbaga parang nagkakaroon ng muka, nagkakaroon ng simbolo, nagkakaroon ng tatak. Yan. And these are all called archetypes. Archetypes. And the most inclusive archetype is the notion of self-realization, which can be achieved only by attaining a balance between various opposing forces of personality. Kasi ang theory ni Jung, ano siya kumbaga parang kung kay Freud, yung mga structures of personality, yung id, ego, superego, talks about conflict, 'di ba? Resolving conflicts. Yung kay Carl Jung, ang ating daw personality is all about balancing, no? Kumbaga parang we seek harmony, no? Laging may two sides. Yan. Kumbaga parang sa coin, there are always two sides of everything. There are opposites, no? And we always seek for harmony and balance. Okay? And yung self-realization, mangyayari daw yon usually kapag na-attain natin yung tinatawag nating balance. For example, you cannot know that you're happy if you did not feel sad. Parang ganon. No? You will not realize the value of life if you don't experience a little bit of death. Yan, something like that. So that's why self-realization is when we attain, no, the balance between opposing forces of personality. Thus, Jung's theory is a compendium of opposites. Ayan. People are both introverted and extroverted, rational and irrational, male and female, conscious and unconscious, and pushed by past events while being pulled by future expectations. Diba? Kumbaga, para kay Carl Jung, talagang para tayo nasa gitna, no? Laging bumabalanse sa mga bagay-bagay. No? Pareho tayong introvert, extrovert. No? That's why there is a term called ambivert, di ba? Na sometimes it's about preference kasi yung introversion, extroversion. Sometimes there are situations, there are experiences na mas prefer mo maging introvert for that specific time and place. And sometimes you prefer to be more extrovert. Okay? And yun nga, rational, irrational. Sometimes you think in logical terms, sometimes you do not. Di ba? Minsan, di rin ganun ka-rational yung mga iniisip natin, yung mga decisions natin. Yan. And then we are both male and female. Yan. Kaya meron siyang archetype of animus and the anima, no, that we have as a female, I have this animus in me, the masculine side, and as a male naman, they have this anima inside them, or the feminine side. Okay? And to the point na sabi ni Carl Jung, we are all bisexual. Yun. Kaya niya nasabi yun kasi because we have or we are embracing this opposite gender, no? And yun nga, yung conscious and unconscious. Being unconscious for Carl Jung doesn't mean that we have these repressed materials, no, or memories, but he viewed the unconscious as the source of consciousness and the matrix of new possibilities in life. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about the biography of Carl Jung, who is Carl Gustav Jung. So Carl Gustav Jung is born in July 26, 1875 in Keswil, a town on Lake Constance in Switzerland. Okay, and then Jung's father, Johann Paul Jung, was a minister in the Swiss Reformed Church, and his mother, Emily Pricework Jung, was the daughter of a theologian. Yan. Kaya talagang very religious yung kanilang family. Okay, kasi ministro yung tatay niya, so parang pastor, ganyan, and then yung nanay naman niya, anak ng isang pastor din. And then Jung's mother's family had a tradition of spiritualism and mysticism. Yun yung sinasabi ko a while ago, no, yung bang naniniwala talaga yung family nila sa mga, yun nga, sa mga patay, ganyan. Kumbaga parang very, very weird, no? Very mystical, ganyan, spiritual. And his maternal grandfather, Samuel Priceworth, was a believer in the occult and often talked to the dead. Alright? See? And then Jung's parents had three children. A son born before Carl but who lived only 3 days and a daughter 9 years younger than Carl. Thus, Jung's early life was that of an only child. Kaya mas, ano siya, mas, kasi ang haba ng gap eh. Mahaba yung gap niya doon sa kanyang, ano to, sa kanyang kapatid na babae. Kasi 9 years yung gap nila. So, parang in a sense, matagal siyang namuhay na only child. Kaya yung development niya, ah, as basis natin, if ang basis natin ay birth order, well, it can be compared to an only child, yung development ng kanyang personality. So, parang ganun, no? Alright? And then, Carl is an emotional and sensitive child, no? Actually, sakitin din siya. He was described also as weak. Some biographers describe him that way. And Jung identified more with the second side of his mother, the unstable, mystical, clairvoyant, archaic, and ruthless, which he called her number two or night personality. Kasi according to Carl Jung, her mother possessed two personalities. Okay, one kind and loving, and the other is harsh and aloof. So, sa tatay niya kasi, hindi rin siya ganun ka-close. Kumbaga, parang ang tingin niya sa tatay niya ay weak, no? And sa kanyang nanay, mas strong yung tingin niya. And yun nga, parang may dalawang personality daw. So, being a child, mas nag-identify siya dun sa second side ng mother niya, which is yun nga, yung unstable, yung medyo harsh and aloof, no? Doon sa number two or night personality. Night kasi medyo dark, no? Dark, dark personality, ganyan. And then, at age 3, Jung was separated from his mother kasi na-hospitalize yung mother niya for several months. And he did not know why, kung ano yung cause, no? Parang ano yun eh, pabalik-balik yata yung sa hospital yung nanay niya. And parang ang suspect siya ng marami is his mother is or was suffering from schizophrenia that time. And yun, so parang some biographers of Carl Jung also suspected him having child psychosis also, no? Considering the fact na doon siya nag-identify sa kanyang mother, which is yun nga sa second side ng mother niya. Kaya siguro gano'n, no? Kaya siguro na-perceive niya yung nanay niya na may dalawang personalities because sometimes kind, sometimes not. For a long time after, he felt distrustful whenever the word love was mentioned. And years later, he still associated woman with unreliability, whereas the word father meant reliable but powerless. Ayan. Kasi nga, yun yung kinalakihan niya, no? Yun yung nakita niya sa kanyang parents na yung nanay niya is somewhat unreliable because sometimes she's kind, sometimes she's harsh, no? And the father naman, oo, reliable, supportive, provider, however, powerless kasi parang sa bahay nila, siguro mas nasusunod lagi yung nanay niya in terms of decision making, problem solving. Yung tatay hindi masyadong pinakikinggan yung kanyang mga opinion sa bahay nila. So, maaring gano'n, no? Kaya niya nasabi yan. And during his school years, Jung gradually became aware of two separate aspects of his self, and he called these his number one and number two personalities. So parang dito nagkaroon siya ng realization, no, na meron siyang dalawa na personality, no, and he called this number one and number two. And later on, this became the intra or introvert and the extrovert personality. Ayan. So, sa kanyang libro na Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung wrote of his number two personality. I experienced him and his influence in a curiously unreflective manner. When he was present, number one personality paled to the point of non-existence. And when the ego that became increasingly identical with number one personality dominated the scene, the old man, if remembered at all, seemed a remote and unreal dream. So parang dito sa kanyang paragraph, sa kanyang sinabi dyan, sa book niya, parang sinasabi niya na kapag daw nag-exist yung isang personality, the other subsides, no? So meaning, we cannot exhibit, no, the two personalities that we have at the same time, at the same place. Okay? So parang one at a time, di ba? Parang kumbaga, ano yung mas preferred, no? May ganon. Ano yung preferred mong gamitin during that time? So, mawawala yung isa yung mangingibabaw, no? Dominant yung isa ay naka-subside lang, subline, di ba? So, merong dominant at merong nakatago lang or dormant. Okay. And in Jung's own theory of attitudes, ayan, his number one personality was the extroverted and in tune to the objective world. Okay? And whereas his number two was introverted and directed inward toward his subjective world. So, yun yung parang, yung definition niya of what is extroverted. So, meaning, hindi lang naman to pagpapakita na ikaw ay sociable or ikaw ay energetic na tao or agresibo, kundi naka-tune in ka sa external, no? Yung objective world, yung concrete, yan, yung nakikita. Yan. Kaya yung kapag extrovert ka, mahilig ka sa mga outdoor activities, diba? Gusto mo yung may manual labor, no? Kasi nga, extrovert, objective world. Kung ano yung nakikita, ano yung nasisense, ano yung nalalasahan, naaamoy, naririnig. While the number two personality was called introverted and directed inward. Ibig sabihin naman nito, naka-tune in ka dun sa mga bagay na hindi mo naman nakikita sa subjective world, no? Ibig sabihin nito, nag-i-imagine ka, nagdi-daydream, ganyan, no? Yung mga mental representation ng mga bagay-bagay from the objective world. Okay? So, hindi naman necessarily pag introvert, quiet ka, ganon. Pero, may ganon din naman, ganong aspeto rin. Pero, yun nga, mas naka-tune in ka dun sa kalooban mo, no? Dun sa panloob, dun sa na hindi nakikita, abstract, yan, subjective world. That's why, yung creativity, medyo introverted yun, no? Kumbaga parang, kailangan mo mag-imagine para meron kang ma-create. Yan, sa external world. Okay? So, yung number 2, yun nga, yun yung mas ano sa kanya noon, nung time na yun. And then, parang may time din na dinescribe niya yung tawag doon, yung lifespan development, no? Na kung saan, there is a point in our lives na mas dominant yung extraversion kaysa sa introversion. Like, for example, at childhood, during childhood, mas ano daw tayo, extrovert, di ba? Objective, kasi mas ginagamit natin yung mga senses natin. And we explore, we discover everything, no? In our world, in our surroundings. While, ayun, adolescence, ayun, extrovert din, ganyan. And then, pagdating ng middle age, nagiging introvert, alright? Nagiging, kumbaga, nagdinilay-nilay, nagmumuni-muni ka na, nagre-reflect ka sa sarili mo, no? Kung ano bang purpose mo sa buhay, and then that starts also the emergence of your creativity during that time. Kaya may mga nadidiscover ka pa sa sarili mo na kaya mo palang gawin, no? Unlike before, na mas focus ka sa earth, no? Sa worldly activities. Ngayon, mas more on subjective activities like religious activities or any introverted activities. After completing his medical degree from Basel University in 1900, Hume became a psychiatric assistant to Eugene Bleuler at Burgoldsee Mental Hospital in Zurich, possibly the most prestigious psychiatric teaching hospital in the world at that time. So, ayun, actually ang gusto niya talagang course is archaeology. However, they cannot afford that course or that program. Kaya, nag-aral na lang siya ng medicine. And he was planning to specialize in surgery where he came across a textbook by a German neurologist that described psychiatry as invariably subjective. Okay, kasi yung neurology, it studies the brain, di ba? The brain is external. It's concrete, no? Nakikita siya na, kumbaga, nag-exist talaga siya sa objective world. While in psychiatry, also related to neurology, you study the mind naman, which is subjective naman, di ba? Hindi mo naman nakikita yung thinking, hindi mo naman nakikita yung reasoning, di ba? Hindi siya concrete. That's why it's subjective. So, yun, naging interesado siya sa psychiatry. And then, this description piqued Jung's interest, and then he recognized within himself a spiritual dimension that he refused to deny or minimize. Here was a field that might provide the key to some of the dreams, mysteries, and obscure happenings that he had been trying to understand. Yan. Kasi nga may mga bagay-bagay na hindi siya maipaliwanag externally. That's why mas interesado siya dun sa subjective world. Yan. That can be explained by studying psychiatry. And, yun nga, nakasama rin niya si Eugene Bleuler. By the way, si Eugene Bleuler ang nag-coin ng term na schizophrenia. Alright? Siya ang nag-coin, sabihin siya yung naka-discover ng term na schizophrenia. Okay? Schiz meaning split and then phrenia meaning mind, diba? Friend. Friend is mind. But it's not like splitting of the mind, which means splitting of personality. It's not like that. Different disorder yun. Splitting of the mind because sa schizophrenia, what happens there is the person is having difficulty in identifying or realizing which is reality and which is fantasy. Okay, reality is again extroverted, objective, di ba? While fantasy is introverted and subjective. Yan. So, pag nahirapan ka na i-distinguish yun, i-identify which, so, yon pwedeng magkaroon ng schizophrenia. That's why psychosis happen. No? Yung psychosis, ito yung pagkakaroon ng hallucinations, delusions, no? Kasi nga, nagsasanib na hindi na mapaghiwalayan, hindi na ma-distinguish ano bang realidad sa imagination lang. And that's why majority of the patients with schizophrenia, they live in their fantasy world. They do everything, diba? Naguhubad sila, na okay lang sa kanila, parang feeling nila, ay okay lang yun, no? Kasi nga, nabubuhay sila sa kanilang fantasy world. Okay? And then later, Carl Jung became a lecturer also at the University of Zurich. Yan. And he married Emma Rauschenbach, a young, sophisticated woman from a wealthy Swiss family. And then Freud had warm personal feelings for Jung and regarded him as a man of great intellect. So, nung nakita sila, no, yun nga, nagka-discover sila ng mga intellects nila, no, ng mga interest din nila. So, yun nga, na-discover ni Freud na okay itong taong to, matalino to, gusto ko siya. Yeah, parang ganon. And then they became best friends. And these qualifications prompted Freud to select Jung as the first president of the International Psychoanalytic Association. And then the two men were highly impressed with each other and with each other's work. Ayan, impressed sila sa bawat isa. And that meeting began an intense personal and professional relationship. For some time, Freud regarded Jung his as a father, as a son. Yan, parang ang turing niya dito ay isang anak. Yan, ganun siya ni Freud. However, yun nga medyo may mga bagay na hindi sila napagkakasunduan kaya umalis din si Carl yung sa kanya, no? He broke with him later on. In 1909, G. Stanley Hall, the president of Clark University and one of the first psychologists in the United States, invited Jung and Freud to deliver a series of lectures at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Ayan. So, ito yung first travel nila sa US. And while they were on the trip to America, ito yung time na nagkukwentuhan sila about their dreams during the travel. And dito yata sila nagkainisan dalawa kasi, syempre, as they talk about their dreams, na-uncover yung mga unconscious part of their mind na bring into awareness yung mga repressed material nung kanilang collective unconscious and the personal unconscious. That's why Carl Jung broke up with him, no? Hindi niya na nagugustuhan yung tinatakbo ng usapan, parang ganon. And also Freud, no? Parang doon sila nagkainitan. Pero dinamdam ni Freud yon, yung paghiwalay nila ng landas ni Carl Jung. Dinamdam niyang maigi because he regarded Carl as his apparent best friend and And yun nga, other than that, we don't know the true story if they had, personal relationship, kung hanggang saan ba yung personal na yun, no? And, ayan, yung also asserted that during the trip to America, Freud was unable to interpret Jung's dreams, especially one that seemed to contain rich material from Jung's collective unconscious. Okay, so yun nga yun yung kwento, no? Na dun sa trend. In this dream, eto yun, Jung and his family were living on the second floor of his house when he decided to explore hitherto unknown levels of his house. At the bottom level of his dwelling, he came upon a cave where he found two human skulls, very old and half disintegrated. So, Jung associate the skulls to some wish. So, whom did Jung wish dead? So, my wife and my sister-in-law. After all, I had to name someone whose death was worth the wishing. I was newly married at the time and knew perfectly well that there was nothing within myself which pointed to such wishes. So, kasi 'di ba according to Freud, ang dream ay wish fulfillment, na meron kang mga wishes sa totoong buhay, sa reality, no, sa conscious life mo, na gusto mo sanang mangyari, kaya lang, hindi pwede, no? Kaya yun, sa dream, lumalabas siya in distorted manner, yan. So, skull symbolizes death, di ba? And, yun. So, para lang mabigyan daw niya ng pangalan, kasi nga, tinatanong, kumbaga ini-interpret ni Freud yung panaginip ni Carl Jung na sino bang gusto mong mamatay? So, sino ba yung, kasi skull means death, no? So, parang sino yung gusto mong mamatay? Parang ganon. Kaya, eto yung kanyang sinabi, yung kanyang asawa at yung kanyang, um, ano ba yung sister-in-law? Hipag. Yan. Okay, and then, um, alright, at that time, Jung was not newly married, but had been married for nearly 7 years. So, parang nagsinungaling siya in a way, no? And for the previous 5 of these years, he was deeply involved in an intimate relationship with a former patient named Sabina Spielrein. Yun. So, kaya pala niya wini-wish kasi meron siyang, other woman. Yan. And, according to him, Jung needed more than one woman to satisfy the two aspects of his personality. Kasi kiniklaim niya, di ba, na meron siyang dalawang personality. Yung number one is the extroverted, the number two is the introverted. So, however, the two women who shared Jung's life for nearly 40 years, okay, alam din ni Emma yun, were his wife Emma and another former patient, and may isa pa, no, named Antonia or Tony Wolf. Okay. Emma Jung seemed to have related better to Jung's number one personality, yung extrovert, while Tony Wolf was more in touch with his number two personality. Yan. So, kaya pala minsan may mga, reason or reasoning na, parang hindi makapili ng mamahalin, no? Pwede bang dalawa? Ayan. Kasi nga parang, when I'm with you, I'm a different person, and when I'm with her, I'm also a different person. Parang may ganun. So, somehow, this could explain why sometimes we get along with the other person, and sometimes we do not, and sometimes, gano'n, naghanap tayo ng ibang tao na magsasatisfy nung needs natin as a different person. In any event, little doubt exists that Jung needed women other than his wife. In a letter to Freud, dated January 30, 1910, Jung wrote, "The prerequisite for a good marriage, it seems to me, is the license to be unfaithful." See? So, parang justify niya yung pagiging unfaithful. In short, Carl Jung is a number one cheater of his time. Okay? So, but we cannot judge naman. So, ito ay according naman sa kanyang buhay, sa kanyang biography, sa kanyang theory of personality na very unique talaga, which he explains very well that we have these opposites, no? We possess the number one and the number two, which later on became the extroverted and introverted personality. Okay? In 1907, Jung wrote to Freud of his boundless admiration for him and confessed that his veneration has something of the character of a religious crush and that it had an undeniable erotic undertone. Yan. So, medyo, no, nagpapahiwatig na itong si Carl Jung ay mayroong crush, no? Or some kind of parang, ano ba, infatuation, no? And medyo sexual ang dating, no? May ganun. So, kaya naman nachichismis sila na may something. Jung continued his confession saying this abominable feeling comes from the fact that as a boy, I was the victim of a sexual assault by a man I once worshipped. Yan. So, meron pala siyang ganong karanasan. That's why may attracted din siya, no, sa lalaki or sa mga older men, no? Kasi parang mas matanda yata si Freud sa kanya, something like that. Or maybe he regarded Freud as a father figure or parang ganun. Jung's rejection of Freud's sexual theories may have stemmed from his ambivalent sexual feelings toward Freud. Okay? Kasi nga, hindi niya, hindi niya ina-accept yung sexual concept or context nung theory ni Sigmund Freud. Dahil nga, meron din siyang tinatago na sexual feelings towards Freud, no? Parang denial, ganun. No? May, defense mechanism. Alright? So, yun. So, from December of 1913 until 1917, he underwent the most profound and dangerous experience of his life, a trip through the underground of his own unconscious psyche. So I think this is during the middle age period of Carl Jung, no, which he was um, governed or dominated by his number number two personality, no, yung introverted. Yan. And ayan na nga, yung period of creative illness, no? He termed this as creative illness because in this time, he was more creative than before, no? So, similar ito dun kay Freud's na self-analysis. So, both men began their search for self while in their late 30s or early 40s. Freud, as a reaction to the death of his father, nung namatay yung tatay niya, doon siya nagkaroon ng self-analysis na parang na-depress konti, naging introvert, ganyan. And then yung, as a result naman, doon sa kanyang split with his spiritual father, no, nung nag-broke up sila, si Freud. Okay. So, Carl is a Christian but did not attend church. Hobbies included wood carving, stone cutting, and sailing his boat on Lake Constance. In 1944, he became a professor of medical psychology at the University of Basel, but poor health forced him to resign his position the following year. That's why he began his private practice, no? And then after his wife died in 1955, he was mostly alone. The wise old man of Kuznach. He died in June 6, 1961, in Zurich, a few weeks short of his 86th birthday. So, ibig sabihin, konti na lang, no? Week after na lang, birthday na niya, mag-86 na siya, namatay din siya. And then at the time of his death, Jung's reputation was worldwide, extending beyond psychology to include philosophy, religion, and popular culture.